When the camera turned to him, it was Freddy behind the wheel. He backhanded the girl in the passenger seat and she squealed, head snapping back. "Nobody likes a backseat driver," Freddy said, howling with laughter as the car careened off the road. A Nightmare on Elm Street, Dreamspawn, Chapter 19. Jane stood in the dim, stuffy school boiler room, engulfed in a cold, liquid sense of unreality. Every detail of the room seemed hyper-intense, jewel-like and overly complex. She seemed aware of every spider, every dust bunny, every soft, breathy sigh from the massive furnace. Brandon was there too, standing beside the knocked-over ladder. Rose was nowhere to be seen. "What the hell happened?" Brandon asked, rubbing his eyes with a thumb and forefinger. "Are we asleep?" Jane asked. "Where's Rose?" Brandon stepped forward and put his arms around Jane. His solid, muscular body felt reassuringly real against hers. "I don't know," he said, "but I don't like it." "Come on," Jane said, taking his hand. "We need to find her." The fairly straightforward hallway to the stairs had become a dim and claustrophobic maze, the ceiling so low that Brandon had to stoop down as they walked. The dusty stacks of furniture around them all seemed malformed and strange. Chairs with 6 uneven legs, desks whose scarred and graffitied surfaces slanted away at inexplicable angles. There were sleek black mice chittering and fighting amongst themselves in the spaces in between. But Jane couldn't bring herself to look too closely at them. Her peripheral vision told her that, like the chairs, they too had far too many legs. "Shit!" Brandon said, as they rounded the corner and saw the open doorway that was leading back into the boiler room. "We're right back where we started. We're never going to get out of here." "We have to keep trying," Jane said, nauseous urgency boiling in her belly. "Come on." They doubled back, yet nothing they passed seemed even remotely familiar. Jane was beginning to fear that Brandon was right when they found the stairs at the far back of a long storage room filled with old science equipment. They had to climb over cardboard boxes and squeeze between broken metal cabinets that were filled with jars of acid, fetal pigs, and models of the human reproductive system. But eventually they made it to the bottom of the steps. "You've got to be kidding," Brandon said. The steps were impossibly huge, the first one chest high on Brandon. "Shit," Jane said. "This is completely ridiculous." "Okay," Brandon said, hands around Jane's waist. "I'm going to lift you up. Ready?" Jane nodded, and Brandon hoisted her until her waist rested against the edge of the first step. She bent in half and struggled to haul her legs up onto the step. She got one up, the other dangling down, and realized that Brandon could probably see right up her skirt. She wished she had bothered to choose nicer panties. But there was no time to worry about that now. She dragged her other leg up and scrambled to her feet. Brandon quickly pulled himself up onto the step beside her and stood. "Great," he said, looking up at the stairs above them. "One down, 99 left to go." They struggled slowly up the gigantic stairs, exhaustion tugging at their aching muscles. It was grueling and torturous, and, less than 2/3 of the way to the top, Jane collapsed, arms and legs useless as pudding. She could go no farther. "Jane," Brandon said, holding her face between his palms. "Jane, come on. We can't give up now." "We who, jock boy?" she snapped. "Why don't you just go on ahead and leave the fat girl behind?" He recoiled from her bitter, vicious tone, and she felt immediately sorry. "Look, I just can't do it anymore," she said more softly. "I'm sorry." He paused for a moment, wheels turning behind his brown eyes. Then he nodded and stood. "Get up," he said, reaching for her hand. She took it and reluctantly allowed him to pull her to her feet. He turned his back on her and patted his shoulder. "Hop on," he said. "Tarzan, carry Jane." "Carry me? Are you kidding?" She shook her head. "No way." "Yes way," Brandon said. "It's the only way." "But I'm 125 pounds, she protested. He smiled. "Come on now. You're 130 at least. And anyway, I use 275 for my squats. No problem." He patted his shoulder again, blushing thickly. Jane stepped forwards and hopped awkwardly up onto Brandon's back. "Hold on," he said, and vaulted up to the next step. As cavalier as he tried to be about it, Jane could see how hard this was on him. He was pouring sweat, arms shaking as he hauled himself up another, and then another step. But she also noticed that the steps were getting progressively shorter, shrinking from chest to waist high, and lower. Finally, Brandon turned and sat Jane down on the top step, lifting his t-shirt to blot the sweat from his face. "Christ, that's a fucking workout," Brandon said. "Tell you what, though, from now on, I'm bringing you with me to the gym. You feel much nicer than a barbell." The door at the top of the steps was also preposterously huge. Jane had to get up on Brandon's shoulders to reach the deadbolt. The knob was the size of a car tire, and Jane needed 2 hands to turn it. When they stepped through the door and into the main stairwell, the door they had passed through had returned to its normal size. Everything about the stairwell was totally normal. The clean, normal-sized steps, the pale sun filtering through the diagonal metal mesh over the narrow windows, the institutional green paint on the walls even. Silently, they headed up to the 3rd floor. The top floor seemed completely deserted. Jane looked into the classroom where her first period French class was held. It was empty. Its familiar glossy travel posters and clean green chalkboard identical to the first day of school. The only difference was the total lack of human presence. "Where the hell is everybody?" Brandon asked. Jane frowned and headed down the hall, methodically checking every classroom. Each one turned up empty. There were textbooks left open on desks. A television played some lame educational video, squawking pointlessly to itself in an empty room. An abandoned experiment bubbled away, forgotten in the deserted chemistry lab. When they got to the end of the top floor, the only room left unsearched was the art studio. Inside it was bright and airy, with 3 big windows overlooking the curved turtle shell of the gym below. Jane noticed several of Brandon's paintings on the wall, including one of the famous Virgin de Guadalupe. Only she wore wire-rimmed glasses and had long flowing black hair, her starry blue robe hugging voluptuous curves. She stood, delicately balanced on a computer keyboard, haloed in flames. The painting was titled Nuestra Señora de las Geek Girls. Brandon smiled sheepishly. "I painted that before, well," he shrugged, "I never had a chance to show it to you." Jane bit her lip, feeling sabotaged by sudden fierce emotion. Here they were in some lunatic dream world, where they might die at any moment, and she still could not escape the spreading ripples of this massive crush that enfolded her. She loved Brandon so intensely that it hurt, and it gave her this disconcerting awareness of her life as a timeline. Not just an eternal now, but a part of a greater lifetime that she might look back on and wish things had been different. This was her first love, something she would remember for the rest of her life, no matter what. The love against which all future loves would be compared. She wanted to take time to savor these feelings instead of rushing madly through, but there was no time. No time. Seeing that painting and the way it made her feel made her more determined than ever to stop Rose's madness and to stop Freddy. If they won, there would be all the time in the world. And if they lost, well, they just had to win. "What's that?" Brandon said, tilting his head towards the supply closet. Jane turned and saw a spreading crimson puddle beneath the crack in the supply closet door. "Paint?" Jane suggested. "I don't think so," Brandon replied, frowning and taking a step closer to the closet door. "Be careful," Jane said, but it was too late, because his hand was on the knob opening the door. There was a corpse in the closet, bloodied beyond recognition. It was an older woman. That much was clear. Frizzy white hair clotted with dark blood, skirt around her thick waist and legs, awkwardly open, revealing pale, veiny thighs and plain white underwear. Broken pots of paint splattered her with cheerful primary colors, but by far the most predominant color was crimson. Brandon took a deep breath. "Mrs. Beeman!" he said. "Oh my God, it's my art teacher, Mrs. Beeman." "He's here," Jane said, shaking hand frozen halfway to her lips. "Freddy's here. I know it." "Is this real?" Brandon asked, turning to Jane with bright fear in his eyes. "Mrs. Beeman? Is she really?" Jane nodded silently. "Fuck," Brandon said, a thin sheen of tears in his eyes. Jane watched with numb horror as Brandon squatted and pulled the old woman's skirt down, smoothing it over her legs and whispering, "Fuck," over and over. Then they heard a sound out in the hall, quiet at first, but getting gradually louder. It was footsteps. "Brandon," Jane whispered, "listen." "I never even knew her first name," Brandon said softly, eyes locked on the corpse. "She was the best teacher I ever had, and I don't know her first name." "Brandon, be quiet," Jane whispered more forcefully and gripping his arm. He looked up at her with a kind of shell-shocked distance in his eyes, and she put her finger to her lips. The footsteps in the hall were getting louder and louder. When he heard them, his eyes grew wide, fresh fear cutting through the numb trauma. Frantically searching for anything to use as a weapon, Brandon grabbed a sculpting tool and pushed Jane behind him, as a dark silhouette appeared in the frosted glass rectangle of the door. Her heart was beating a mile a minute, and her mouth felt dry and full of sand. The doorknob turned and the door swung open. "What the fuck is going on here?" It was Lola. Shaky relief stole Jane's breath, and she collapsed in a nearby chair. "Jesus, you scared the shit out of us," Brandon said. "Where's Amber?" The blonde appeared in the doorway behind Lola. "Right here," she said. "Like, is this real?" Jane gestured towards the murdered art teacher. "Too goddamn real for my taste," she said. "Holy shit," Lola said. "Like, this is totally fucked," Amber said, her hand pressed to her temple. Jane explained what happened with Rose and her weird device, the sleeping gas. "She wants Freddy to kill her," Jane said, "and she wants to take the whole school with her." "So you're saying we're sleeping now?" Amber asked. Jane nodded. "Along with everyone else in the school?" Lola asked. "That's right," Brandon said. "Well, fine. Then where is everybody else?" Amber asked, trying not to look at the dead teacher, and failing. "I have no idea," Jane said. "We searched this whole floor and didn't find a single person except—" Jane looked back at the corpse of Mrs. Beeman and swallowed a thick mouthful of nauseous saliva. "We searched the ground and the second floor, plus the gym and the cafeteria," Lola said. "No one." "Well," Jane asked, "where haven't you looked?" Lola shrugged. "What about the auditorium?" Amber brought up. "The auditorium?" Lola sneered. "What, is Freddy holding an assembly?" Sure enough, when they made their way down to the auditorium, that's where everybody was. The lights were dimmed and students and teachers were packed in tight, watching some kind of brutally graphic safety film about drinking and driving. The four of them snuck in and walked down the far right aisle, sticking close to the wall. The faces in the audience were blank and enraptured, eyes glassy. On the big roll-down screen, a serious stone-faced cop pointed to a huge smear of blood on the pavement. Behind him was a crashed car. The driver sprawled across the hood, headless in a bright diamond spray of safety glass. A deep, monotone voice droned on about the dangers of drinking and driving, while the gruesome slideshow of corpses continued. A woman nearly cut in half by the wheels of a truck. A child who had been dragged beneath a Corvette. A motorcyclist whose entire body had been pulped, save for his helmeted head. Charred and barely human remains being plucked piecemeal from a twisted, smoking wreck. "Many teens think that this sort of thing will never happen to them," the voice intoned. "But they are wrong. Dead wrong." On the screen, four obviously 20-something teenagers in dated clothes, joked and drank at a party. Jane scanned the audience for any sign of Rose. The girl was nowhere to be found. The pretty teenagers went out to a car, a big red Cadillac. There was some badly acted dialogue in which one girl tried to convince her boyfriend not to drive. Of course, he did not listen, and the four took off. In the back seat, one couple necked vigorously, while the girl in the front seat told her boyfriend to slow down, her eyes wide with fear. "Shut up, bitch," her boyfriend said. When the camera turned to him, it was Freddy behind the wheel. He backhanded the girl in the passenger seat, and she squealed, head snapping back. "Nobody likes a backseat driver," Freddy said, howling with laughter, as the car careened off the road. The car skidded across the bare dirt, heading directly for the camera. The growl of the engine grew louder and louder, and Jane's eyes widened with sudden, awful recognition. It was just like that horrible vision she had on the first day of school. The car loomed huge on the screen, tires squealing and Freddy's manic laughter echoing through the auditorium. The students sat like zombies, slack-mouthed and staring. "Look out!" Jane screamed, flinging one arm around Brandon and the other around Lola and Amber, yanking her friends to the floor. The car smashed through the screen, razor shards of glass spraying across the crowd. Impossible, since the roll-up screen was made of reflective cloth, not glass. But more impossible yet was the massive candy-apple bulk of the car flying out of the screen and crushing the first 5 rows beneath smoking tires. Terrified screams echoed through the hall as the students and teachers ran for the doors, faces and arms glittering with hooks of glass. The doors slammed shut and the crowd jammed up against them, fists banging uselessly against them as more and more people pressed mindlessly forward. Jane saw a teacher go down, screaming as she was trampled by the panicked students. Jane watched with drowsy horror as Freddy kicked open the reluctant car door. His companions inside the car were twisted, bloody ragdolls, lolling lifeless in the seats. And there were over a dozen dead and dying students smashed beneath the body of the car. He casually brushed a few cubes of safety glass from his red and green sweater and strolled around to pop the trunk. "We gotta get out of here," Brandon said urgently. "The doors are all blocked," Amber said, voice tight with panic. "There's no way out." Freddy extracted a tire iron from the trunk and smacked it against his palm, a smile spreading across his lips like a man about to dig into a good meal. He walked slowly over to a female student sitting dazed in the aisle. Jane recognized her as the waif with the clarinet from her homeroom class. The girl's eyes were filled with glass, hands reaching blindly as she sobbed. Her frantic fingers found the rough weave of Freddy's trousers, and she turned her blind face up to him. "Help me," she begged. "I can't see anything. I can't see." Freddy smiled and raised the iron above his head. "Take a better look!" Jane turned away, horrified at the wet, meaty thuds as Freddy obliterated the girl's face with the tire iron. He kicked her tiny body aside and stepped up to another terrified girl, a geeky black freshman with braces. Jane's math teacher, Mr. Fong, put a shaking hand in front of her. "Don't," he said. "Please." Freddy laughed and slammed the iron into the side of Mr. Fong's head. "No one likes a teacher's pet!" The math teacher's glasses flew off and he fell, jittering to the floor. "Now," Brandon said, gripping Jane's arm. "We have to get out of here now." "This way," Lola said, leading them down the aisle towards the stage and away from Freddy and the panicked herd of students. Jane could not stop herself from looking back. Freddy stood splattered with crimson and cheerfully beating a jock easily twice his size with the blood-slicked tire iron. He held the boy down with one foot and hit him until his blond head caved in. It was the most appalling thing Jane had ever seen, but she was losing her emotions, a dull, chilly distance spreading like frost over her perception. Freddy continued to bash in his brains. "I guess the jocks do have brains. Who would have thunk it?" She wanted to be horrified, but her mind could not seem to accept what was happening. It just didn't seem real. She felt weirdly lazy, and it seemed almost sensible to lie down and have a little nap. Brandon was saying her name and slapping her face. She felt annoyed by this intrusion. She just wanted to rest her eyes. It was all a dream anyway. Any minute now she would just wake up. Jane, Brandon said. Come on, Jane, please, stay with me. She's in shock or something, Lola said. Jane felt Brandon lift her in his arms, and then they were running, down behind the stage, up some stairs, and out into a weird little room that Jane had never even knew existed. For all she knew, it didn't exist in the real school. None of this was real. Why couldn't she just wake up? Brandon sat her in a chair and slapped her gently. Jane, he said. Come on, Jane. Stop hitting me, she said, shaking her head. Where are we? We're in the security office, Amber said. There were banks of black and white monitors, each showing a different section of the school. The gym, the hallways, the cafeteria, the auditorium. Jane's eyes were riveted on the mayhem displayed on the little screen. Freddy was cutting a swath through the crowd, not even killing each person, just horribly wounding them, smashing cheekbones and collarbones, and all the while grinning like a manic game show host. More and more students fell to the ground and were trampled under the feet of their fear-stricken peers. On the monitor screen, the blood was black as tar. Amber was furiously searching through every drawer, every cabinet. Like, they must have some kind of weapons here, she said, joining Lola in the search. Lola found a can of pepper spray, but nothing more. Amber continued to search with a kind of hysterical desperation, until she found a false bottom in one of the drawers. Yes, she said, pulling out a nearly full bottle of Jim Beam. I knew old Jonesy wouldn't let me down. Amber, Lola said, are you crazy? What about your sobriety? Fuck it, Amber said, unscrewing the cap and raising the bottle to her lips. It's only a dream, right? She tipped her head back and took a long drink. Shit, Lola said. What do we do now? Brandon asked. I know what I'm going to do, Amber said, wiping her mouth and taking another deep pull from the bottle. God damn it, Amber, Lola said, snatching the bottle away. The last thing we need is you bombed out of your mind. What's the difference anyway, Lola? Amber said, close to tears. We can't get away. He's going to find us, and he's going to kill us all. Enough, Brandon said. We just need to stay focused. If we can find Rose, we can destroy the glove. Look at him, Amber said, gesturing to the screen. He doesn't need the damn glove to kill us. Maybe it will work, and maybe it won't, Brandon said. But we got to try something. We can't just stay here and wait for him to find us. Guys, Jane said softly. You go try something, Mr. Fucking Heroic, Amber said, snatching the bottle back from Lola. Me and Jim are staying right here. Guys, Jane said again, a little bit louder this time. What? Lola said. Jane pointed at the screen showing the auditorium. The majority of the students were dead or dying. A few still beat hopelessly against the door in the middle of it all. And in the middle of all of the room, Freddy stood completely still, staring right up at the lens of the camera. In his arms, he cradled a dead teacher. Her mouth was a frozen scream filled with shattered teeth. He let the corpse drop and took a step closer to the camera. Can he see us? Amber asked. Impossible, Brandon said. Freddy moved closer and closer until his hideous burned visage took up the entire screen. He raised his fingers towards the lens, and to Jane's horror, the glass surface of the screen began to stretch like rubber. His fingers pressed against the screen, distorting the image of his laughing face. The screen clung to his hand as he reached for Jane. She was frozen in terror as the cold glass fingers touched her cheek. Brandon pulled Jane away from the groping hand, and beside her, Amber staggered and sprawled across the desk, dropping the bottle to smash at her feet. The glass hand gripped her blonde hair, yanking her closer to the screen, and she screamed. Get it off me! Amber squealed, gripping the fingers that twined in her hair and struggling to pry them loose. Fuck! Get it off of me! Holy shit! Lola grabbed one of Amber's flailing arms. Don't just stand there, help her! Brandon grabbed Amber's other arm, and together he and Lola tried to pull her free. She shrieked as if she were being torn in half, and her head started to push through the screen. Where the screen bisected her face, she became black and white. Wide blue eyes, now pale gray, as she was pulled deeper and deeper into the monitor. Brandon and Lola struggled fiercely to hold on to her, but it was as if she were being pulled inexorably into a machine, mindlessly strong and unrelenting. Her mouth went into the screen, cutting off her scream like a guillotine, and her body began to spasm uncontrollably. The little monitor screen was a mere 8 inches wide, so there was no way her shoulders could possibly fit through. Yet the pulling continued until a series of violent, wet snaps and crunches sounded as her bones shattered and folded in on themselves. Blood from ruptured organs exploded from splits in her taut, red skin as she was yanked deeper and deeper into the screen. The three of them watched in horror and stunned disbelief as her pelvis cracked like a china platter and slid through the blood-slicked square of the screen. Her legs followed easily. Then she was there on the other side of the screen in Freddy's waiting arms. Her body and face were smashed beyond any recognition. She did not even look human. Freddy lifted a loose and dangling rag of an arm and made her wave bye-bye to the camera like a baby. He looked up into the lens, winked, and then said, "Now that's what I call must-see TV. It's almost to die for. Ha 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 ha!" He then threw the tire iron at the camera. The screen went gray and dead. Chapter 20. Kayla and Ashley huddled together behind a dusty length of curtain as madness reigned in the school auditorium. Ashley had been breathlessly screaming over and over until Kayla finally had to slap her several times, shaking her and telling her to get a grip or she would have to find her own hiding place. Now the blonde just stood there with her fingers crammed into her mouth and her eyes wide as saucers staring at nothing. When Kayla ventured a peek into the chaos of the auditorium, she wished that she hadn't. It was far worse than before, if that were possible. Hundreds upon hundreds of students, people Kayla knew, were flopped on the floor like dying goldfish, and that horrible, disgusting guy was just laughing and laughing in the middle of it all. Kayla saw her ex-boyfriend Ty, kneeling about 3/4 of the way up the center aisle, his face masked in blood. Her mother had forced Kayla to break it off with Ty, because she felt that he was too ghetto and a bad influence on her daughter. He was funny with a wide, easy grin and a rubber face that never failed to make Kayla smile, even on her worst days. He could imitate anyone, teachers, students, celebrities, and his impersonation of Amber had been particularly hilarious. He was a good lover, too, unselfish and devoted. He was heartbroken when Kayla told him it was over, and looking at him now, crumpling to the floor with his life leaking slowly away, Kayla realized with a sudden spike of anguish that she really did love him. If only she had the guts to stand up to her mother, things might have been different. Maybe Ty would still be dead, and she might be dead beside him, but at least they would have been together. But Kayla knew that could never happen. She was more likely to run out into the auditorium and snatch the tire iron out of the burned man's hand than she would be to ever stand up to her mother. Kayla's mother, Alana, had been born dirt poor, as she frequently reminded her daughter. Dirt poor in South Central Los Angeles, a bleak and nightmarish ghetto war zone, more terrifying than Afghanistan, where Kayla would wind up as an unmarried mother on welfare if she dated boys like Ty. Kayla's mother threatened her with South Central the way that Catholic parents threaten their kids with purgatory. Kayla had no real idea of where South Central actually was, other than the obvious fact that it must be somewhere to the south of central Los Angeles. She had never been there, and the only time she ever saw images of her mother's former hood was on television during those awful riots. Kayla did not entirely believe her mother's horror stories about South Central, but she did not want to go there and find out for herself either. Alana had worked for most of Kayla's early life as a television executive for a cable channel that catered to the demographic of middle to upper middle class black women. She spent every penny she made making sure that Kayla had all the things she never had. Ballet lessons, horseback riding lessons, designer clothing, everything. They lived in the quiet and mostly white San Fernando Valley neighborhood of Toluca Lake, close enough for her mother to commute to the cable station in Hollywood, but not close enough for Hollywood's urban decay to rub off on her sheltered daughter. Eventually, with careful and meticulous investments, Alana was able to save enough to buy a house out in the more affluent suburbs, far, far away from Los Angeles. Hollywood, and most importantly, away from South Central. She quit her high-stress job in order to make Kayla her full-time career. Sure, she had her mail-order beauty company, high-end bath and body products made with organic, native African ingredients like shea butter, avocado, and palm oil. But that was only a hobby. Her investments provided more than enough to live on, and so she put all her effort into sculpting Kayla into the sophisticated, educated, high-class black woman, Kayla always heard the capital letters in her mother's voice, that she had always dreamed of becoming herself. Of course, there was absolutely no way Kayla could ever live up to this imaginary black woman her mother wanted her to be. Every day of Kayla's life, she was presented with a list of her myriad of flaws, abysmal, hopeless failures that she must constantly strive to overcome. The first and worst of these flaws was something so basic that Kayla could never look in a mirror without feeling horribly inadequate. It was her skin color. Objectively speaking, it was lovely, a rich and sumptuous milk chocolate hue with a slightly golden undertone. But to her paler-skinned mother, it would be forever shamefully dark, as if Alana herself had personally failed and somehow overcooked her child. Kayla, as her mother frequently reminded her, did not pass the paper bag test. The paper bag test was a particularly cruel joke between Alana and her catty friends at the cable station. If a person was lighter than a brown paper grocery bag, like Alana, then they passed the paper bag test. If they were darker, like Kayla, then they failed, just like her dark-skinned father who had run off. Alana liked to point out to Kayla, with an even lighter-skinned woman, as if there were some lesson to be learned from this, some cause and effect that Kayla needed to take to heart in order to understand the ways of the big bad world. But Kayla's dark skin was only one of many flaws. There was her terrible, rebelliously kinky hair that her mother forced her to straighten with vile, stinking relaxers that burned her skin and eyes like acid. Kayla remembered the first time she had been forced to endure this painful treatment, the day before she started first grade. "You don't want to go to your new school looking like some snappy, nappy-headed backwoods pickaninny, do you?" her mother had asked while Kayla sat trembling and trying to be brave, perched on 2 phone books in the huge beauty shop chair. Kayla had been the only black student in her first-grade class at Toluca Elementary. None of the other kids would sit next to her, even though her hair was glass smooth and perfect. As the years went by, Kayla learned to subjugate herself to fit in at all costs. She figured out who the most popular girls were and allied herself with them through a slow and tenacious campaign of pseudo-friendship, watching carefully for their likes and dislikes and making them her own. In truth, Kayla hated her shallow, mean-spirited new friends intensely, but she knew that her personal feelings made no difference whatsoever. She needed them to lend her credibility, and they liked having her around because it proved they weren't prejudiced, which would be, like, totally uncool and stuff. So that nappy-headed, paper bag test-failing little girl was slowly buried under a meticulously constructed exterior of expensive hair, flawless nails, fashionable clothes, and suburban enunciation. Kayla's mother was pleased with her creation and liked trotting Kayla out like a show dog at her frequent cocktail parties. Alana's friends all oohed and awed over Kayla's suburban perfection and bemoaned their own children's hopeless shortcomings. Just to make sure Kayla didn't get a big head or anything, Alana would always point out Kayla's various flaws, and Kayla would stand there, dying, while the adults clucked over her and nodded, agreeing that it was unfortunate that she couldn't seem to do better than a B- in math. Yes, it was an awful shame that her hair was so hard to manage. When that traitor Amber and her horrible geek friends had forced Kayla to cut her hair, she had been so utterly terrified of her mother's reaction that she had spent most of that night sitting alone in the sleazy all-night donut shop. Of course, her mother flipped out completely and called the police. When a patrol car spotted Kayla and brought her home, her mother looked as if she had been shot, collapsing breathlessly into a chair at the sight of Kayla's bald head. As soon as the officers were gone, Kayla received the worst beating of her life. She could have come home pregnant or on crack, and her mother would have been less upset. You would think that it was for her mother's own head that had been shaved. For over a week, Kayla's mother gave her the poisonous silent treatment, refusing to even acknowledge her daughter's presence in the house. Then, the following Saturday afternoon, her mother marched her into the salon with an iron grip on her upper arm and sat glaring at her while her stylist spent 6 hours meticulously gluing pricey human hair extension onto the meager hair that was tentatively growing in on her fuzzy scalp. The tight, heavy braids made Kayla's head and neck ache all the time, and Kayla's mother took the $250 bill out of Kayla's allowance. She supposed it could be worse. Ashley's parents made her work in their restaurant to pay off the exorbitant bill for her silicone breast enhancement. Of course, Ashley's mom had picked up the bill for her daughter's nose job. It was a Glasner family tradition, a sweet 16 rite of passage, and Ashley's two older sisters, Chelsea and Jennifer, had both gone through the same initiation. Their mom didn't want to be surrounded by living reminders of the awful truth of her own genetic imperfection. But these mundane teenage torments all seemed meaningless next to the vile and impossible horrors unfolding before Kayla's eyes in the school auditorium. Everywhere she looked, she saw someone she knew dead or dying. Miss Tanner, the gym teacher, gasping and spitting in a pool of blood. Mr. Ratner, the principal, recognizable only by the jaunty golf club pattern on his tie. To her left was little Courtney Priest, a brown-nosing sophomore girl who had been trying desperately to be part of their clique and was the source of much mockery and scorn. Shane had often referred to Courtney as Mini-Me, since the sophomore meticulously co-opted everything about Shane's style and look. She even dyed her hair red like Shane's, and recently passed out during gym class from going 4 days without eating. Shane had scoffed, calling the younger girl a wimp, who just didn't have the spine for real hardcore marathon dieting. Now Shane and Courtney were both dead. Death had erased all cliques, all the cultural dividing lines that used to seem so important. Geeks lay atop jocks. Corpses of stoners were heaped up with preppies and wannabe gangstas. The few black and Asian faces were melded together with white faces, forming a single, indistinguishable ethnicity of bloody crimson. Teachers and students had died side by side. The hierarchical system of privilege and popularity that Kayla had struggled to master had been single-handedly obliterated by that mad demon in a battered fedora. And now, that demon had turned towards the stage, nose wrinkling as if he could smell Kayla and Ashley in their hiding place. Kayla sucked in a terrified breath. Ashley didn't seem to notice. The burned man stalked towards the curtain, slow and ugly smile blooming across his face. Kayla tried to make her feet move, to run, to get away, to do something, but she was paralyzed with fear. The demon yanked the curtain back. "Hello, ladies," he said, his awful smile wide and hideous. Ashley made a tiny noise like a baby bird as the burned man grabbed her and pulled her close. Kayla backed away in horror as he pulled a box cutter from his pocket and slashed at Ashley's artificially enhanced chest. A wet splatter of blood and thick, clear jelly sprayed across his cheerful face, and Ashley screamed. Kayla broke and ran. She got less than 6 steps when the burned man leapt at her, tackling her and sending her sprawling on her belly on the stage. His stinking bulk pressed her down from behind, and his rotten breath blew hot in her ear. "It's no fun killing spoiled little bimbos like you," he said, like a lover. "You know why?" She fought and struggled fiercely against him, but he was far too strong. "It's because you aren't afraid of anything," the burned man continued. "You have really no nightmares, because nothing bad had ever happened to you." He caressed her cheek with the box cutter, and she squealed, twisting hopelessly away. He laughed and made his voice even louder and stronger. "My mommy's mean. She's mean to me. My hair is too curly. Poor, poor little Kayla." "Please," Kayla begged. "Please." "Now your boyfriend Ty," the man said. "He was much more fun to kill. That kid had some real juicy nightmares. Prime time stuff." The man wrapped his burned fingers around Kayla's face, and suddenly she was in a tiny, dark bedroom. A little boy sat pressed into a corner beneath a shattered window, while several men did something terrible to his mommy on the skewed and bloody bed. "Fuck, man," one man complained. "I can't do it with the kid watching." "Face the wall," another said, pointing the enormous barrel of a gun in the boy's face. "Do it, or I'll blow your fucking head off." The little boy turned to the wall, too scared even to cry, and the men laughed and went back to what they were doing. Kayla gasped and squeezed her eyes shut. "But don't feel jealous, Kayla," the burned man said. "Something really, really bad is gonna happen to you. Right now!" Kayla opened her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks and splashing onto the scarred wooden floor of the stage. "You won't live long enough for any more nightmares," he whispered. "But don't worry, I'll make sure this one is bad enough for 12 lifetimes." He gripped a handful of Kayla's braids, yanking hard. Kayla screamed as her scalp tore, big chunks of her hair coming loose in the burned man's fist. The pain was huge and blinding as he tossed the bloody braids aside and turned her roughly over on her back. She fought to keep the box cutter away from her face, but she was not successful. He was able to peel more than half of the paper bag test failing skin off her face before she sank into cold, merciful unconsciousness. "Sweet dreams, Kayla!" This has been chapters 19 and 20 of A Nightmare on Elm Street Dreamspawn. Hope you're enjoying the book so far. I gotta say, chapter 20 seemed like the author was just trying to fill in as many pages as she could with Kayla's backstory before killing her. I mean, I know Kayla was mentioned earlier in the book and stuff, but all in all, I think tonight's narration was pretty good. I enjoyed chapter 19 and 20, and I'm looking forward to the last part of the book. There's 4 more chapters to go, and I've decided that when we get to the final 2 chapters, I'm going to do it on a live stream. I'm going to start doing all the conclusions of these books live for the subscribers to watch. And after that, anybody that didn't get to watch the live stream can go back and watch it later to hear the end of the book. Hope you guys are enjoying it so far. The next book I'm going to do is going to be kind of a surprise. I didn't think I'd be doing these as soon as I'm getting to, but the next book is going to be Halloween, The Scream Factory. So the next narration after Dreamspawn will be a Michael Myers novel. I'm really excited about that. So, everybody, until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s Slasher Librarian saying thanks for listening and pleasant dreams!